Hello, everyone. This is lesson 16. It consists of practical ways that Spirit speaks to us. I'm going to be relating mostly personal experiences and the experiences of others to show you the variety of ways that Spirit can give us information. When we left off, I was in my cabin out in the desert. And here I am again in my rocking chair with Spirit. I'd been out in the desert there about 2 years when, and sitting in the chair, I looked up and I noticed that one bush that I'd never paid any attention to, that was about 100 yards away, seemed to stand out from the rest of the bushes. And I had been beginning to learn more and more that when anything stands out, that's usually Spirit trying to get to me in some way. When I'm in a store, if all of a sudden one person stands out among others, I pay attention to that person to see if I'm to learn something from them. And if they happen to talk to me, I pay real close attention to what they might be saying. So this bush stood out, and I dismissed it, went in the house, came back out again. And as I stood there, I watched it. And it looked, I could begin to see dashes of black and white light flowing up from its roots, going out its limbs and going out to the branches. And I thought, boy, I've never seen anything like this. I've never had a vision like this. So I stood there and watched it, and watched the dashes then dropped down to the ground and began to go into all the desert plants. Then the dashes approached me, and they filled me. And then I looked at the rocking chair, and they were filling the rocking chair. And then I was given to know this is divine life. Everything is divine life. That became very clear to me, and it wasn't like I heard words. I more sensed the truth of it. I then looked around the desert, and the desert was completely filled with this dashed energy. I was so much in the beginning, so much in the moment, and so much taken by this that I knew I couldn't work. So I just very slowly began to walk in the desert. And it stayed with me, that sense of divineness in everything, in the mountains, in the sky, in the clouds. It strongly stayed with me most of the day. As evening came, I came back to the cabin, and slowly it all disappeared. And I went in the cabin and just sat down, completely rested, completely one with all, completely in the Garden of Eden experience, in the promised earth experience, and very satisfied with myself. I felt my heart going out to the entire world. That was a very powerful experience, and I haven't had one like that since. But it was, I'm narrating it to you to give you an idea of what you can expect, and don't be surprised if something like that happens to you. One day I was out in my rocking chair, and a lady next door who was on the way of the soul. By the way, one of the things I've discovered is that when you're on the way of the soul, it's amazing how you attract other people who are on the way. Came over and sat beside me. And as we were talking, she says, I'd like to share with you my wake-up experience, she called it. I said, okay, I'd like to hear it. She said, 5 years ago, I went up on top of a mountain, and I was walking along, and all of a sudden, I felt that I was being supported by the rocks that I was walking on. And as I looked down, it looked like heat waves of love were coming to me. And that these rocks were alive and supporting me. Then I realized that everything is supporting me. And she said, I stayed in that state for a couple of hours, and then it all disappeared. Then she said, I'd like to ask you, do you think I was imagining that? So we talked about it for quite a while. I think we need to be open to wake-up experiences. Spirit wants to get through to us. I was out there, as I say, probably 2.5 years, and it became winter. And I went out with my winter coat and sat in the chair. And I sensed strongly to go south. And I knew I had a very limited budget, and I didn't know where to go south. And so I trusted again. One of the things I've learned in listening to Spirit is that you've got to trust when ideas come to you. You also use your mind to see if it's practical. So my mind said it is impractical, but my soul kept saying, no, go south. So I went in the house, took out a map, and looked south already. I was well in almost central New Mexico. And what was south was the country of Mexico. So I took out the Mexico country map and scanned it and waited to see if Spirit would show me any place to go. And as I scanned northern Mexico, one place stood out. It just almost shouted at me. It was a place called Copper Canyon. And as I then searched on the net for Copper Canyon, I found out that it was a canyon, that it was deeper than the Grand Canyon in the United States, and that when it was snowing at the top of the canyon is so deep, people are in t-shirts and shorts at the bottom of the canyon. So I was sensing to go south to get someplace warm, and that meant the bottom of the canyon. So I checked my budget and decided that I could probably make it if I slept in the car. So I grabbed Spirit, packed up, and we headed south. And we got to the city of Creel in Mexico, and it was snowing and it was cold. And I was told that the single road down to the bottom of the canyon could not be driven by my station wagon. You needed a four-wheel, high-rise vehicle to get to the bottom. So I sat, asked Spirit, and I had the strongest sense, yes, you can make it. My mind fought it, but I kept coming back, and finally I said, well, I'll turn around if it really gets that bad. So we started down. It's 30 miles to the bottom of the canyon. All the way down, I was letting Spirit guide me in the car around boulders, when to get out and move things out of the way, how to build a little boulder bridges across ravines, and we made it. At the bottom, I asked Spirit, please show me where to live. And I wandered around and kept asking in my broken Spanish where something inexpensive, where I could find an apartment or a house that was inexpensive. And I was led to a man who rented me a small, barely livable house for practically nothing. And so Spirit and I moved in. And at that time, I was becoming more and more troubled by the difficulty I was having living in the moment, living in the beginning. I'd been out in the desert 2.5 years. I thought I would only be out there a year. I was very concerned about money, about finances, about my life, where I was going. And I found that I was living more in the past and the future, and my mind would not slow down and be in stillness. And it was beginning to bother me terribly that I could not be still. So we began to hike the trails. And as I hiked the trails, I thought, well, it'll bring me into stillness, but it didn't. And so it was driving me nuts to come all the way down to this canyon and to not find what I really needed, which was a movement from stillness. One day, the day before I left, we were coming down a ridge that was kind of coming up from the floor of the canyon. And I came to a curve in the trail, and I almost shouted out loud with my whole being. And I asked the question, why can I not be still? Why can I not quiet my mind? And I was looking down at the trail, and coming from in front of me was this deep, powerful voice that said, because you think you are in the center that you are the center of the world. And I looked up, and that voice came from an old cactus. It was right in front of me. I got the strongest sense that that cactus had talked to me and told me that my problem was that I was making myself the center of the world. So I said, okay, if that's the issue, I'll start focusing on other things. So as I stopped and looked around, and with my third eye began to look at that cactus, really looked at the cactus, it suddenly became a being that was as important as I was. It became there. In other words, I'd been walking by all of this wildlife and had not really been with it. So then I turned around and started looking at other things, and I kept looking with my third eye, paying attention to them rather than paying attention to me and my emotions and thoughts, until they became like me and became alive and became beings in the world. So I resolved, okay, I'm going to try to do this for a couple of days. So I returned to the house and continued to not let my mind interfere with my observation of what was going on around me. Every time my mind would go in the past or the future, I would look, I'd third eye, stop, and look at what was right there. I went to bed that night with the lights on so that I could look at the ceiling, so I could look at the walls and not think. When I got up in the morning, I felt different. I said, okay, there is a world out there. So when I went for breakfast at a tortilla stand, I third eye watched the woman very carefully until she all became a being as important as me. And she became part of my world, so to speak. We then packed up and drove out, and as we drove back a 2-day trip back to Santa Fe, every time my mind would go in the past and the future, I would return to looking at the road, looking at the surroundings, looking down at my hands and the steering wheel, anything but to make myself the center of my world. When I got back to Santa Fe, I was completely transformed. I was in the beginning. I was movement from stillness, and it felt like I had moved into another world. Now, I share that with you because right now I want to share other methods that I have found to be in the moment, which is absolutely key to listening to spirit. Because if we're in the past, we usually will hear ideas that will keep us in the past. If we're in the future, we'll hear ideas that will bring us more misery in the future. So here are some ways that I found that people on the way of the soul keep themselves in the beginning. They do what I was doing, number one, third eye watching. they'll actually go out for a walk and do nothing but look at what's going on until it appears differently. And when it appears differently, they know that they have come in oneness with it, and that takes them out of the past and the future. They will third ear listen to music. Instead of just kind of dreaming and listening to music, they'll listen to every note. They'll listen to the instruments. Some people use mindfulness exercises. Those, you can find those on YouTube, on the internet. I call them soulfulness exercises. You can use different meditation techniques. I think everyone should learn as many meditation techniques as they can and then devise their own. Some people use yoga exercises in order to be in the moment. Other people exercise. They find that by focusing on their body and exercising, they can get out of their heads and into their body and into the moment. The last one is a very powerful one. It's called third eye loving of others. Let me first read a poem about that from Jesus. Jesus suggests that we love your brother, which is everyone and everything, like your soul. Guard him like the pupil of your eye. This is one of the few poems that Jesus uses the word love. When you love your brother like your soul, you feel connected to that person. In order to do that, you use your third eye and third ear to really perceive that person. You've got to look past the things that bother you, the things that your mind is calling bad and good. You've got to put yourself into a trance, so to speak, so that your third eye and third ear can see the person with the tree of the knowledge of life. Then, once you've done that, then you guard yourself and the person by noticing what qualities are bad or good in the person. For example, the person may be manipulative. The person also may be very kind. But those things become apparent after you love the person as you do your soul. Let me provide suggest an exercise that I find that is incredibly helpful for on the way of the soul in terms of evolving from one level of truth and love to another. This is something I have done many times. You go out and you find someone with whom you do not connect, with whom you do not feel one with. For example, at one point in my life, I had a tremendous prejudice against very obese people. I found a woman who had 2 or 3 children, who was very obese, and she was walking down the street. I followed her and put myself in her shoes for about an hour. I thought of her getting up. I thought of her in the bathroom. I thought of her making the bed. I thought of her getting her children ready to go out on the street. I thought of her concerns about money like everybody else. I put myself in her shoes as I walked behind her for about an hour. At the end of the hour, I felt connected with her. She was me and I was her. Our souls connected. At that point, I knew I could stop. What it did for me was remove my prejudice about very obese people. I was having a false self, thinking that I was better than they were because of my body. So the exercise involves either sitting in a restaurant and trying to connect with somebody and seeing them with your third eye and loving them unconditionally, or walking behind them. But the key I find to personal growth, the absolute and most important key, is that you continue to grow in love of more and more people, especially the people that bug you. that drive you nuts. As you can do that, you become free of your false selves. You become more loving of yourself, and you gain the knowledge to protect yourself from them, from their downside, and you become more appreciative of their upside. Well, that's the end of the lesson. It was not terribly theoretical. I'm trying to bring out just ways in which Spirit can lead us. If you like this lesson, please click on like. If you'd like to leave comments and questions, do so below and I'll answer them. Otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Have a great day.